Okay. So we're learning about the inserts into the Amida. So we're in the section of prayer. We're coming close to the end of going through all the different sections of prayer. And we're now looking at these inserts. We'll finish that today. And if we have time, we will begin the next section, which is quite interesting. The section that deals with the repetition of the Amida, because it's quite an interesting phenomena where we've all just done the Amida, and then now we're hearing a repeat. So we'll learn more about that, please God, either the end of today or tomorrow. But as far as section 19, we started by speaking about mentioning rain in the beginning of the Amida, and what happens if you get to do that, or you mention it out of place. Then we continue to speak about asking for rain in the middle of the Amida. And again, what happens if you forgot to ask, or you asked out of place, or you're not sure what you did. And then today we move on to the next insert, which is Ya'aleh v'Yaveh. So just to give a little bit of context, we have these 19 blessings in the Amida, and the mitzvah, according to scriptural law, is really that when a person needs something, they turn to Hashem and they ask Hashem for his needs. But when the Jewish people were going into exile, the rabbis realized that people were losing their ability to talk to Hashem, to articulate themselves. They were between languages and felt like inadequate to be able to communicate with Hashem. And so the sages, with the level of divine prophecy, instituted originally 18, and it became 19 blessings. And these 19 blessings incorporate all of the different needs that a person may need. And so really they're general categories that in which a person could ask Hashem for all of his needs. And we certainly want to do this right. And so therefore, when we begin by praising Hashem, we want to mention in the right seasons that one of Hashem's praises is that he gives us rain. That's a big bracha. And when we're asking for produce, then along with that comes the request for rain in the seasons that we need that. And another one of the blessings is the blessing where we speak about being able to return to serve Hashem in the temple. And that's one of our blessings. Is one of the fundamental dimensions of Judaism is the is being able to come to Jerusalem and to connect with Hashem in the holiest place of the world. And today we're unable to do that. And we ask to be able to once again be able to serve Hashem with the coming of Mashiach. And in that particular prayer, if it is a day where we would have had a special offering that would have been brought in the temple in connection with that special day, then it is incumbent upon us not just to ask Hashem to be able to restore Jerusalem to us in the full sense, but more than that, so that we will be able to offer whatever particular offering we would have been able to offer in temple times. Now, as far as offerings per se, the subject of offerings, it's a fascinating subject and it's beyond the scope of this class. But this little introduction helps us understand what is the prayer of Ya'aleh v'Yaveh. You may have many a time been in shul where they said, today we are going to insert the section called Ya'aleh v'Yaveh. And you've wondered, what is that and why are we saying it? So that's what it is. Ya'aleh v'Yaveh is a special, beautiful prayer where we ask Hashem, starting with, I think, 12 different words of being able to go back up to Jerusalem. Ya'aleh v'Yaveh v'Yagia v'Yiratza v'Yishaba. All these different phrases ask Hashem to please enable us to return to be able to serve you in Jerusalem. And this prayer is inserted whenever it would have been a time where we would have where there would have been a special offering brought on behalf of the Jewish people. Is that clear? Okay. With that introduction, now let's see how the Ya'aleh v'Yaveh works. So just another quick word of introduction. When do we say Ya'aleh v'Yaveh? We say it, as I just said, whenever special offerings would be brought on a weekday, it would be added. So when would that be? That would be on Rosh Chodesh. Okay, at the beginning of the month, there was a special offering for that. It would be on the festivals. So when it's actual Yom Tov, like the first day of Sukkot or the first day of Pesach or the first 2 days, then it's a whole separate prayer. It's a special prayer for Yom Tov. But if it's one of the intermediary days, it's the festival, but it's not Yom Tov. So we're davening a weekday davening, but it's still part of the festival. So that would be the second occasion where we would add Ya'aleh v'Yaveh because that is a time where we're doing the weekday davening, but we're asking Hashem to please enable us to restore the temple in Jerusalem. So in other words, there are, as far as I could remember, there are 2 times when we say Ya'aleh v'Yavai, either on Rosh Chodesh or on the intermediary days of Pesach and Sukkot. So that's when we should have inserted it, but we're human beings, and as I've often a time mentioned, the Torah has solutions for us in every situation that we find ourselves in. So it could happen as human beings that we forget. We forgot to insert the Ya'aleh v'Yavai. What do we do now? Now, you can't exactly ask a rabbi because you're in the middle of the Amida, and one is not allowed to speak in the middle of the Amida. I mean, to take out your phone and start Googling wouldn't be a great idea either. It might take you a little bit too long to do that. So this is actually something that's quite relevant to know, because once you know it, you know it. And if you're stuck, you're not going to be able to ask anybody at the time. So here we go. It looks like a very long paragraph, but it's fairly simple. So if one forgot to add the special Ya'aleh v'Yavai prayer on Rosh Chodesh, either in the morning prayers in Shachris or Mincha service, okay, or if one forgot to add these prayers on any of the prayers, Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv, of Chol HaMoed, of those intermediary days of the festivals. So basically, you were supposed to say Ya'aleh v'Yavai and you forgot. Pretty much, this is any time you're supposed to say Ya'aleh v'Yavai. There's only going to be one exception we'll speak about soon, which is the night of Rosh Chodesh. So anytime you need to add Ya'aleh v'Yavai, if it is not the night of Rosh Chodesh, the following laws apply. So if you realized your mistake before you said the final Yiyul Ratzoi, that final paragraph at the end of the Amidah, then one would go back to the beginning of the paragraph where one would usually insert it. That paragraph is called Ratzei. It's just before we bow for Modim. And then you would start the beginning of that paragraph when it's inserted, and you would say the paragraph again, inserting what was missed and going forward from there, because we can't jump around in the middle of the Amidah. Even if you remembered, before you started Modim, which is the very next blessing, if you've already completed the bracha where you were meant to say it, then you'll go back to the beginning of that bracha, to the beginning of Ritzei. Just like we said by other things when we spoke about rain. We said if you've missed the boat, then go back to the beginning of that blessing. However, if you realize before completing the bracha, meaning you're still in the very bracha where you usually would say Ya'aleh v'Yavai, you're still within that blessing, then you could say it wherever you remember, because you're still within context. Everything has its place, and the place to speak about restoring Jerusalem and the temple to us is in this particular paragraph, and that's the place to speak about Ya'aleh v'Yavai, that we should be able to remember the special day of Rosh Chodesh or whatever it is. And then you would conclude meaning you would move on from there. Okay, now this is really basically what we've said so far. Is if you're in the middle of the very blessing where it's usually recited, then good. And if you've moved on, then go back to that blessing. That's what we've said in simple terms. That's simple. If you're still there, then fix it on the spot. If you moved on, then go back. However, if you've already said the second Yiyul Ratzai, meaning you've already finished the Amidah, you've already about to take your 3 steps back. So now that the Amidah is complete, you would need to go back to the beginning of the Shemona Esrei and redo it correctly, because when it comes to other sections of the prayers, maybe there's more room to go easy, but when it comes to the Amida, everything is precise and it's exactly asking for exactly what we need, and therefore if we haven't done it right, then the Amida needs to be repeated. So as of what we've said so far, unless it is the night of Rosh Chodesh, if one forgot to insert the Ya'aleh v'Yavai, one would actually repeat the Amidah, which, as we mentioned before, can be a little embarrassing, because while everybody's finishing up their davening, you're already up to round 2. You're up to saying the Amidah again. However, on Rosh Chodesh night, if it was the Ma'ariv service, the night of Rosh Chodesh, whether 1 day Rosh Chodesh or 2 days Rosh Chodesh, then once you finish that particular blessing, that blessing where we usually ask, where we mention Ya'aleh v'Yavai, once you've said Baruch Atah Hashem and you've mentioned Hashem's name, then there's no need to go back. It doesn't matter. Rather, you can complete the bracha Machzor Shnas L'Tzion and complete the Amidah. Why is that? It's because when was Rosh Chodesh made? Rosh Chodesh was sanctified during the day. Rosh Chodesh it's actually quite fascinating how Rosh Chodesh came about. It was a very dynamic phenomena, very interactive. It wouldn't just be calculated, but really Hashem tells us that I want you to spot the new moon. And when you do spot the new moon, then come and testify before the court, and they will cross-examine you. And the Beis Din were actually experts in astrology. And they would ask the people coming to the Beis Din, where exactly did you see the moon? Did you see it close to the horizon or high in the sky, on the west side or the east side? Were the points of the moon facing that way, or were they facing that way? How wide, how thin? And it's quite amazing that the Dayanim, the Beis Din, knew perfectly exactly where the moon would be positioned, exactly how it would be positioned on any day of the year. And they would cross-examine the witnesses, and if both witnesses gave the exact same information, which matched up with their astrology of where the moon would be at that point, then the Beis Din would declare, we declare today as Rosh Chodesh. If nobody would see the new moon, if it was a cloudy night, for example, then Rosh Chodesh wouldn't happen until the following day. So it's quite fascinating that Rosh Chodesh would actually be determined by when it was witnessed by the human eye. And since this declaration of Rosh Chodesh could only take place during the day, therefore it is only essential that we mention Rosh Chodesh during the day. And therefore, if you forgot to mention Rosh Chodesh at night, you forgot to say Ya'aleh v'yavo, then you do not need to repeat the Amida. So that was as far as forgetting to say Ya'aleh v'yavo. The next halacha is a little bit more, it throws in another interesting phenomena. If you're familiar with the prayers, you'll know that on Rosh Chodesh or on festivals, there's an added Amida, which is called Musaf. We added on Shabbos and we added on Yom Tovim. So if you forgot to say Ya'aleh v'yavo, but you did go ahead and say Musaf, so here there's an interesting phenomena. On the one hand, you forgot to mention Rosh Chodesh. On the other hand, you did mention Rosh Chodesh when it came to the Musaf. So here there are different opinions. In the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, which is a text that we have been working through, he actually says you are required to repeat the Amidah. In other authorities, such as the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, the Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, he actually says that no, since you mentioned it in Musaf, you do not have to repeat. So this is an area where there are different opinions. And I guess if you realize after you've already davened Musaf that you forgot Ya'aleh v'yavo and Rosh Chodesh by Shachris, which is an interesting phenomenon because it took you another 20, 30 minutes till you realized that you forgot something earlier and you still remembered what you did, which is pretty impressive in that sense, then ask your rabbi because there are different opinions about that. Okay. And then now we just touch on one or two final points at the very, which will bring us to the end of the chapter. So here's an interesting one. Whenever you do need to repeat the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, then wait the time it takes to walk 4 amos. 4 amos are about 4 steps or 2 meters before you repeat, meaning give it a little pause. And the reason for that is because you take 3 steps back. And remember, that's the way that you're departing from the king. Now, I'm not sure if you remember, we mentioned earlier that when you take 3 steps back at the end of the Amidah, don't run off, because then it's going to look like you're trying to run away from the king. And quite the contrary, it's our honor to be in front of the king. So therefore, when you do need to repeat the Amidah, don't straight away start again the moment you take 3 steps back. Rather, take the 3 steps back, saying that you've departed, and now you're going to redo this and you're going to redo it right. So that's why we pause a few seconds in an instance where the Amidah does need to be repeated. That was 12. And in 13, what happens if the Chazan makes a mistake? So if he makes a mistake in the repetition of the Amidah, we'll learn about that in the next chapter, he would correct it. But if the Chazan made a mistake in the silent Amidah and he knows he is going to repeat the Amidah, so then we say that if he's already a good way in, that he's passed the first 3 blessings, then we don't make him repeat the silent Amidah before he repeats the Amidah, because then everybody's going to be waiting around for him to do basically 2 Amidahs before he starts the repetition. So rather what he would do is he would rely on the fact that he's repeating the Amidah, and then he would have in mind that when he's repeating the Amidah, he's not just repeating it as the repetition, which was instituted to help others that can't daven, but this will actually be his private prayer as well. So that's an interesting phenomena. It could happen that the Chazan's repetition of the Amidah is actually his very own private Amidah. And that would be, if in his first Amidah he made a mistake, then in the repetition he'll be able to correct himself. So let's just see that inside. So yeah, I guess I've pretty much gone through it. If he realized within the very first 3 brachos that he made a mistake in the silent Amidah, then he could go back to the beginning and start again, because it's not going to cause the people to wait too long, because he's still right by the beginning. But if he's a long way in, then rather he will not correct the Amidah that he made a mistake, and rather he'll wait until the repetition, and he'll use that to repeat it. And there's one difference between the silent Amidah and the repetition. A few differences, but one of the differences, well, there's one thing that we only say in the silent Amidah that we don't say in the repetition, and that's the final paragraph at the end, Yiyul Ratzon. And so the Chazan would actually say that at the end of the loud Amidah, the repetition, he would then silently say to himself that final paragraph, and you'd wait then maybe however long it would take him, 10, 20, 30 seconds, and then you would go forth from there. I see it's 5:19, but I'd like to conclude the chapter, so let's try to do this quickly. Whenever there's a fast day, whether it's a communal fast day, a private fast day, which is another whole interesting discussion. Once upon a time, people would accept upon themselves private fast. Today, we are not fond of that. But there is a special prayer that is inserted on fast called Aneinu. If a person forgot to insert this, then he need not go back. If he's still in the middle of that very blessing, he'd be able to add it in. But once he's concluded that blessing, Shomei Tefillah, then he would move on with the Amidah at the very end of the Amidah, just before he finishes, just before he says that final Yiyul Ratzon, may it be your will, the words that I've just recited, he would add it in there. So this was maybe more on the technical side of things, but nonetheless, everything has its place. And maybe the life lesson we could take from here is that we are never lost. Even when we think we've made a terrible mistake and we've gone awfully wrong, the Torah has guidance, especially for us in that particular situation. In every situation that we find ourselves in life, the Torah has specific guidance to help us get out of wherever we are and to grow as individuals. Thank you for joining us, and wishing you a wonderful week.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Thanks, Rabbi.